friends, welcome back to another Before You Read lecture. This Before You Read lecture is the second lecture on the book of Job. It is going to discuss or provide an overview and some reflection questions on Job chapter 20 through Job chapter 31. Before diving into this new material from Job 20 through 21, I think it is helpful just to review briefly what we covered in the first Before You Read lecture on Job, and that is sort of the basic idea of Job is created, or it's framed by this narrative material at the beginning of Job and at the end of Job that really is a sort of once upon a time and they lived happily ever after sort of feel to it. It's almost a folkloric feel to it. It creates a sense of this is anybody, right? Anybody could have lived this sort of life or could have had this sort of experience. And so it sets the stage about this character named Job, who we find is righteous, who's extremely successful. He has a wonderful family. He's married. He apparently owns land and even has slaves. And so from all accounts in the ancient world, he is successful. And by most accounts in the ancient world, this is an indicator of his being blessed by God, which is directly tied to the fact that he is righteous, right? So material blessings and God's human righteousness are connected in this worldview. And that's very much what we get at the beginning of Job and in the end. And then we know there's this tremendous calamity. Job loses everything in the drop of a hat, and we move from this narrative into these poetic dialogues between Job and his friends. We experienced some of those in the previous lecture, and these dialogues fundamentally are related to the problem of evil. They're related to questions about human righteousness. They're really related to questions about wisdom and the nature of the world. And so we've seen that, and we're really going to continue that in our material from Job 20 through 31 today. This is the dialogue continues in this section. We're still in this large cycle of dialogue material, and I would say it continues and it gets a little bit spicy. And as we've seen in the earlier chapters of this dialogue, Job and his friends are often talking past each other. It's presented as a dialogue, but sometimes the responses of one to the other are not super well connected. And so really what we see, as we've seen in previous chapters, is this, it's a polyphonic, it's a polyvalent text that provides access points to different understandings of wisdom, different understandings of how God works in the world, and it's all sort of grounded, or at least focused in, the subjective experience of Job. So the material in chapters 20 through 31 is relatively easy to map out. Again, we can focus on who speaks and when to get a sense of the whole. So this material starts with the speech of Zophar, one of Job's friends, in chapter 20. And then in chapter 21, Job responds, or at least ostensibly responds. Then Eliphaz speaks in chapter 22, and then Job responds in chapters 23 through 24. Bildad speaks in chapter 25, and then in chapters 26 through 31, easily the longest portion of this section of Job, Job responds, and Job speaks in this material. So again, we have this back and forth. Zophar, then Job, Eliphaz and Job, Bildad and Job. And as we've seen in this material, Job is really wrestling with traditional notions of wisdom based on his own subjective experience. Each of these speeches is rich and worthy of our focus and our attention, and so I hope that you'll be able to read each of them carefully and ask questions and underline and make observations. I do want to offer three questions for this reading, three sort of focus points, if you will. The first is, how do these chapters understand the prosperity of the wicked? How do these various characters understand the prosperity of the wicked? And how is Job's experience or his perspective different than that of his friends? So, first question relates to the prosperity of the wicked. The second question is, I would invite you to pay attention, especially in the speeches of Job, but not exclusively in Job's material. Pay attention to what is the nature of God's action in these chapters, both in the present moment of the narrative, but also in the future. What do these chapters tell us about God's action? And finally, pay attention particularly again to what Job says about what I've described in a previous lecture as normal wisdom. How does Job sort of play with concepts of normal wisdom? Perhaps how does Job demonstrate that normal wisdom doesn't work? There's a particularly near the end of this section, you'll see how wisdom in Proverbs, we might remember, wisdom in Proverbs is almost self-evident. Look at the ant, look at the world, and you will understand wisdom. And in near the end of this section in Job, we'll see Job say the exact opposite. Job will say, who could ever find wisdom? Wisdom is inaccessible. The only one who knows wisdom is God. And I think that that's a really poignant part of this material. So again, three questions or three areas of focus: the prosperity of the wicked, God's action here and now and also in the future, and then normal wisdom and its limits. Friends, this material, like the earlier material in Job, will give us lots to discuss, and I'm sure we'll have lots of questions and comments and observations to share. But for now, you got to get to reading. You got to engage this material. So happy reading.